What is going on, ladies and gentlemen? It's hockey time. My name's Cody, and welcome to my channel. Um, I decided to start this out of the blue. I've been playing hockey since I was about 5 years old. Still play and ref to this day, so I figured I might as well start a channel and make some content. Today, I wanted to kind of introduce myself and then go through in my opinion, what a tier list of the NHL teams going into the season look like as they stand as of today, which is August 30th. Um, so, yeah, that's kind of the intro to me. Um, let's get started with the rest of the contents of the video. So, I'm going to just be doing this in alphabetical order. I did already sort out the tiers for the tier list. So we have cup favorites, which are going to be, your top 1 to 4 teams that are really favored to go in and have a really good shot at winning the cup. Your contenders, which are your really strong teams, pretty much your playoff locks. Your playoff teams, these are the ones that aren't necessarily locks, but they should be pretty close to it as far as making the playoffs goes. Bubble teams, these are obviously the teams that could, within a few points of making it or not making it. Outside the bubble are going to be your teams that aren't necessarily horrible, but probably aren't making the playoffs either. Rebuilding are bad. I feel like this is kind of self-explanatory. You'll see examples of these as we go through the tier list. And then Bedard Watch, again, pretty self-explanatory. These are going to be your basement teams. And again, just going to go through alphabetically here. So to get us started with Anaheim, an interesting offseason. I think they didn't necessarily make as many moves as some people might have expected. They did add both Ryan Strome and John Klingberg, but they did lose their captain and Ryan Getzlaf, which is maybe more of an emotional thing than anything else, but worth noting nonetheless. They're going to get another full season of Trevor Zegras. Hopefully, a full season of Mason McTavish if John Gibson can be healthy. I think they do have the chance of being competitive, but I don't know that they're really going to make too much of a push toward the playoffs. So somewhere really could be between outside bubble or rebuilding. For me, I do think they're still in that rebuilding stage. I think you give them and their young players another year to mature, the Drysdales, the Zegras, the McTavishes. And I think they're going to become a pretty competitive team, but for now, I think they're still in this rebuilding tier. Arizona, not really much to discuss here. They're going to struggle pretty much in every aspect of the game this year. Um, they really don't have any scoring threats on the team. I mean, Clayton Keller's still there, but he really doesn't have the pieces around him to be supported well. Jacob Chikrin, I mean, we don't know whether he's going to be playing there to start the season or at all. And it wouldn't shock me at all by the end of the year if he's wearing a different jersey. And then, of course, they really don't have a bona fide starting goalie. I mean, Vimelka's probably their guy going into the season, but again, what can he do over the course of an 82 game slate? How many of those games is he capable of getting through? So yeah, it's going to be probably a pretty tough year for Arizona. I do think that their new rink is going to be a bit more energetic than people are willing to give credit to. Um, I don't know, just something about playing in a smaller rink with a full set of seats is kind of fun to watch and be a part of. But we'll see what they can do. Um, Boston's another kind of interesting team. They brought back David Krejci. Um, I think they're probably somewhere between bubble and playoff. I'm thinking more toward bubble just because of some of the additions that were made on other Atlantic Division teams. They're going to struggle with injuries in the first half of the season. Marchand, McAvoy, Matt Grzelcyk all being out, it's going to be a tough way to start the year for them. Um, they also still don't really have a solidified starting goaltender, which can be good or bad. I mean, they have 2 solid guys that played pretty well for them last year in Allmark and Swayman. For me personally, I'm not a Bruins fan by any means, but I'd like to see Swayman kind of claim the net this year. But again, we'll see what happens as the season goes along. Um, I do kind of think they end up edging out some of the other Atlantic Division teams, but again, it's going to depend on how well they can kind of hold on in the beginning half of the season. And then again, relative to those other Atlantic teams, what they're able to do. All right, Buffalo. Buffalo's tricky, right? Because after the Eichel trade, they seem to improve quite a bit. Um, the biggest issue for them really still is their blue line and their goaltending. I mean, they're going into the season again with, I guess, Craig Anderson as their starting goalie. Wouldn't shock me at all if by the midway point of the season that's Eric Comrie's starting job. Um, but nonetheless, I think probably in this rebuilding tier still. Um, Dylan Cousins and showed some great strides to improvement, becoming a really, really solid NHL centerman. Um, Owen Power, just a few games into his NHL career, is going to be a really fun thing to watch. But I do think that for this year, despite the promise that they showed at the end of last season, they're still going to be not necessarily the bottom of the Eastern Conference, but definitely not pushing for a playoff spot yet. Just a couple more seasons for all you Buffalo fans. Calgary, this was a really interesting offseason to watch for them, right? They lose both Johnny Gaudreau and Matthew Tkachuk. The organization seems like it's in shambles. And then, of course, in losing Tkachuk, they bring back Huberdeau and Mackenzie Weegar. And suddenly the team's kind of like revitalized, right? And then to go from there, they also pick up Nazem Kadri, which is a huge add for them, really bolstering their center depth. And now there's an argument to be made that maybe they're a better team than they were last year. It'll be interesting to watch them out of the gates, see what they're capable of, what their chemistry looks like. I think the biggest thing for them is going to be, can that first line continue to score at the pace it did this past season? We know how great of a passer Huberdeau can be, but can Lindholm continue on the goal pace that he did last season? Was last year's season in Colorado for Kadri, was that a fluke, or is he going to continue that pace? So some of those storylines will be really, really interesting to watch for Calgary. And another big piece for them is going to be, A, can Markstrom stay healthy with the amount of games he's playing? And then B, if and probably when they make it to the playoffs, can he continue to play the way he did in the regular season? I mean, we saw a bit of that this postseason. Played very well in the series against Dallas. He just kind of got outshined by Jake Ottinger. And then in that series against Edmonton, just really, really struggled. I mean, we know that Markstrom's capable of being a very good playoff goalie through that one season in Vancouver a few years ago in the bubble. But we need to see more out of that from him before you can really push Calgary into that cup favorite tier. Carolina, another team that seems like they haven't gone anywhere for a couple of years, right? They have some really, really strong pieces. Don't necessarily have that one superstar that shines out, like obviously the McDavids, the Matthews, the McKinnons. They don't really have that player. Obviously, Sebastian Aho is their guy, right? But he's not on that same level as some of those top, like, franchise players. They did lose Trocheck, Niederreiter, and D'Angelo this offseason, which is going to hurt a bit, I think. They did add the likes of, Brett Burns, Paul Stastny. They're still a deep team, really all over the ice. They have two goalies that prove that they're more than capable of holding the net for them. So I think I'm very comfortable still putting them in the cup contender slot. For me, it's just going to be, can they continue the scoring pace? Can teams kind of figure them out with the dump and chase game that they play? And then can Freddie Anderson stay healthy? I mean, he was a borderline Vezina winner this season, and then of course in the playoffs he didn't get to play a game. So that'll be the one of, if not the main storylines to watch in Carolina this year is going to be Freddie Anderson. Chicago, I mean, I feel for, but at the same time I don't feel for all the Chicago fans because of how dominant they've been over the last decade. I mean, it's tough to see what they've gone through this offseason. Losing DeBrincat and Doc were kind of like your two young, promising pieces, coupled with Kane and Taves, and of course they're both dished out to other teams now. At this point, to me, it almost seems like more of a when than an if Patrick Kane and Jonathan Taves are gone. And aside from the two of them, man, I mean, they really don't have a lot of pieces. Going into the season with probably Peter Mrazek as your starting goaltender is a pretty rough go, especially given the way he played in Toronto last year. But I mean, we'll see. We've seen Peter Mrazek be a pretty solid NHL starter in years past. Maybe getting relocated again will reignite that fire under him, and maybe he can get a good season going. But again, I don't think that there's really a lot this roster can do to. I mean, I'd be surprised if they didn't finish seventh in the Central just because of the lack of talent that's on Arizona's roster. Um, all right, Colorado. This one I'm expecting to get some flack on, but I still want to put them in that Cup favorite category. Obviously, they lose Nazem Kadri and they lose Darcy Kemper, and both of those are huge, huge losses for the Avs, right? I mean, Kadri, you could argue, was like the heart and soul of that team during the playoffs. He kind of was the story, right? I mean, he played so well in the games he played. Um, Went through all of the crap that he went through in St. Louis with the racist altercations there. Um, Gets hurt and then comes back and wins a cup, right? Um, and he was just so good for them, provided them that fantastic second center that they needed for such a long time. Um, and then of course losing Darcy Kemper is tough. I mean, it was interesting for me watching Kemper last year, and I'm a goalie myself. So there were some games I watched Colorado, and he would play well numbers wise, but for the eye test, there was just something about him that made me a little nervous for the Avs. So I don't know. I'm not a huge. It's not a huge concern that they lose Kemper this offseason. But at the same time, I don't know that bringing back Georgiev as the return is going to be enough. I mean, he played 33 games in New York last year, had a 292 goals against and an 898 save percentage. And again, you can argue that, the Rangers aren't quite the team that the Avs were, but it's not like he was going from the likes of an Arizona to the Avs, right? Like they were a pretty strong team in front of him. And yes, we saw the impact of Igor Shesterkin being on the Rangers versus not. Obviously, there's no comparison between those two goalies, between Shesterkin and Georgiev, right? But if Georgiev's going to be the guy for Colorado, he's going to have to take a step. And I think regardless of the season he has, they probably do still make it to the playoffs. I think they have enough raw talent in front of them that it's really not going to matter. I mean, Kel McCarr, Bowen Byram, that decor is just it's ridiculous, man. I don't think they can really do any wrong. I mean, I'm a huge Devin Taves fan, and even in this video, I've already not mentioned Devin Taves when talking about the Avs defense core. So I think they have such a strong roster when it comes to their skaters that I don't think their goaltending is going to be a huge issue for them. But if I revisit this midway through the season, um, who knows? Maybe they're down in the Cup contender category. Maybe they're just one of your average like 2 or 3 seed playoff teams. But for me, I kind of need to be proven wrong before I take them anywhere but the Cup favorite category. Um, Columbus, another interesting one. Obviously, they got the big fish from free agency, right? They got Johnny Gaudreau. It'll be super interesting to watch how his game impacts the likes of Line A. Um, and then, what can the rest of the team do? I mean, they seemingly don't have a ton of scoring threats on their lineup, but last year when they really didn't seem to have a lot of pieces at all, they still weren't a horrible team. I think there were only a couple games below 500 if I remember correctly. And I think if Elvis can string together a good season, I don't see any reason why they're going to be a, a half decent team, or why they're not going to be a half decent team, I should say. Um, I don't think they make the playoffs. I don't even think I would be comfortable calling them a bubble team, but I don't think they're really far from this tier, right? I think Johnny's a huge ad for them. It'll be interesting to see what his production personally looks like, but I think he's going to bring enough to that team, um, to the players around him, that it's going to bolster their performance quite a bit, and it's going to give them a pretty good jump. Dallas, another interesting one, man. I mean, I think going into the playoffs for me, I really didn't expect a lot of them going into that Calgary series. And then Jake Ottinger just completely stole the show. So for me, as far as players go, and I'll have a players to watch tier list coming in a bit here, but Jake Ottinger is going to be up near, if not at the top of it, right? I mean, the guy was unbelievable in that playoff series against Calgary, and I would have loved to see him go at least one more series just to see, what he was capable of. And again, I'm a goalie, so I'm a bit biased. I love watching guys just put on a show that way. Um, But what is he capable of over an 82 game season? He was good last year, but if he can bring even a piece of that playoff Jake Ottinger into this regular season, I think Dallas is going to be a scary team, man. New coach and Pete DeBoer, um, relatively similar lineup. I mean, they bring in Mason Marchment. They do lose John Klingberg, so that's probably the biggest story for them. How much does that hurt their blue line? Um, is it really impacted at all? I mean, we saw in that Calgary series how much it can be a struggle to score against them. So it'll be interesting to watch that team. I think they're probably a bubble team. Um, I'm not confident enough in their scoring yet to put them into that playoff category where I'm completely confident that they're going to make it. But I think they'll be a solid team. And again, I think if Ottinger can bring even a piece of what he brought in the playoffs, they're going to be a pain to play against. And they should actually, for the first time in a bit, be relatively fun to watch. And again, in my opinion, I'm not a Stars fan. I think their brand of hockey the last couple years has been pretty slow, relatively boring. So spare me, you Stars fans, in your opinions. But Detroit, another very interesting offseason. The Eyes plan kind of coming into motion here. I mean, they made a bunch of additions: Andrew Kopp, Dominic Kubalik, Billy Huso, Ben Sherratt, Oli Mata. Um, I mean, they added a lot to this lineup, and obviously the further development of Mason Raymond and Moritz Seider. Um, they should be a pretty fun team to watch. I'm excited to watch the Wings, and unlike the Blackhawks, where I wasn't that upset when they started to decline, something about Detroit being good, I feel like, is just good for hockey. There's always a buzz around that team, whether they're good or bad. So seeing them be good is kind of exciting, or seeing them improve is exciting. As far as where they stand on this tier list, I think they're probably just outside the bubble for now. Um, I'm not quite confident enough in their goaltending as it stands, which is interesting because when Carolina gave up Alex Nedeljkovic for basically nothing, I was one of those people kicking and screaming, wondering what the heck was going on. Why was that the decision that got made? And then, of course, this season he struggled quite a bit. And again, two very different teams that he's playing behind. Obviously, Detroit is not on the same level that Carolina was, but regardless, we didn't see a full season of Billy Huso, and we need to see what Nedeljkovic is capable of behind a team that isn't as strong of a team as that Carolina team was. So they'll be fun to watch this year. I think they probably make a good push. I think they get closer to the playoffs than Columbus probably does. Um, but again, I don't think that they have what it takes to make it there quite yet. But I think their time is definitely coming once again soon. Um, Edmonton, definitely in my contender tier. They managed to keep the majority of their roster intact. They re-signed Evander Kane for a relatively reasonable price, in my opinion. Um, and it seems they finally have an answer that they're comfortable with for their starting goalie with Jack Campbell. Um, and as much as that brings confidence to Oilers fans, that's probably still my biggest question mark. Again, it's another kind of like eye test thing for me. I mean, Jack Campbell had a lot of months this past season, especially the second half, where and Leafs fans will happily tell you that he really wasn't that great. Um, so seeing that for a full season in an Oilers jersey should be interesting. Um, but I think they still have the firepower, very similarly to the Avs, that they're going to be okay even if Jack Campbell doesn't play all that great. I do think he's going to have a pretty solid season, but who knows? Goalies are notorious for being inconsistent, right? There's very few goalies that are, steady over the course of multiple seasons, and the ones that are pretty well known. Um, so we'll see what happens there, but I do think they remain a contender this year. Florida, same deal. Another pretty interesting offseason with the Kachuk trade. Um, for me, I am of the camp that thinks they got worse with the Kachuk trade for this season. Obviously, Matt Kachuk's a fantastic player. He brings a ton to any team he's going to play for, right? Um, but losing Jonathan Huberdeau is huge. I mean, that guy can whip the puck around the ice like maybe only one or two other guys in this league can right now. Um, and I think it's going to impact them pretty sharply. Um, Obviously, losing Mackenzie Weegar is nothing to scoff at either. Mason Marchment. Um, these are all pretty important guys for them. The one thing that maybe doesn't show up on paper that probably helps them is, and I think it would have shown a lot in that Tampa series, is it seemed like they just kind of got out grit. And I'm not, you know, the type of person that thinks that having a ton of sandpaper in your lineup super necessary to win playoff series. But I mean, Tampa just seemed like they wanted it more in the series against Florida. And it kind of showed in the stat line. I mean, they got swept and the games were relatively close, but at the end of the day, Tampa's not a super gritty physical team. And I mean, it almost looked like it was men against boys at some points in that Florida Tampa series. So additions like Mark Stahl, Nick Cousins help. Obviously, Kachuk brings a ton of that grit. Not a fun guy to play against, so I'm sure Florida's super happy to have him. Um, and then lastly for them is, can Bobrovsky keep up his numbers? He had a better season this year. Was a little bit rough in the playoffs. I was actually at the Capitals Panthers game 3, I believe. The game that the Caps won, I believe it was 6-1, and he just, I mean, the team didn't play great in front of him, but it was kind of tough to watch him struggle in that game. So we'll see what Florida can do. I think they're still a very strong team. I think they definitely make it to the playoffs. Should at least make it to round 2. We'll see how much further than that they can get once they get there. LA. Basically, the story for LA is they managed to swap Dustin Brown for Kevin Fiala. So that obviously bolsters their offense quite a bit. Um, Otherwise, the biggest question for me when it comes to LA is their goaltending. Does Quick begin to fall off as he looked to have in seasons past? And does Cal Peterson kind of rebound? He had a pretty rough season last year, but I know the Kings think pretty highly of him. So can he rebound? Can Quick maintain his performance from last year? If so, I think they're probably a playoff team. Um, but that being said, I think they kind of like a lot of people thought of the Rangers. I think they accelerated quite a bit quicker than they thought. So I am going to keep them in the bubble team tier for now. And this is fluid, so I might end up changing some things by the end of the video. But for now, we'll keep them in the bubble tier. Minnesota, I think, is probably our first playoff team here. They do get worse, of course, by losing Kevin Fiala. I think they're still going to be a competitive team. They should still be all right. A full season of Marc-Andre Fleury, and that should be more than enough for them to get to the playoffs. But I don't know that they have what it takes offensively to make it past the first round. I mean, based on where we're standing here, they could be lining up against someone similar to a Calgary, or looking down the road, I mean a St. Louis, a Nashville, a Dallas. So it's going to be tough. I mean, I don't know that I see them making it out of a first round, much like last season with the lineup they have. I mean, Kaprizov, if he takes anything even close to a step back, they're going to have a really, really tough time. And I think Matt Boldy, a full season of Matt Boldy is going to have to show some improvements. I mean, he was really solid when he came into that roster. So I'm excited to watch him, another young player that I'm pretty stoked to see play a full season. But both of them are going to have to be fantastic if this team has a chance of making it to the playoffs and making a playoff run. Montreal Canadiens, another one of those teams that, like, it's good for hockey when they're good, but man, they're in a tough spot right now. I mean, adding Kirby Dach, of course, is good, right? But another season where it looks like they're not going to have Carey Price between their posts, and that is, I mean, he's been the face of that franchise for so long now. And Jake Allen had a pretty solid year last year, but I don't think he has what it takes to make this team a winning team or even a team that pushes 500. So we'll see what they can do. They have a lot of young players that are going to be exciting to watch. I personally love me some Brendan Gallagher. I know a lot of guys don't like him, but uh, I'm a little bit of a sucker for the smaller guys that just have a ton of heart, and Gallagher is definitely one of those guys. So I do think they're in that Bedard watch tier. I don't think they're going to be a good team, maybe even the bottom of the Eastern Conference, but we'll see. I mean, we were all proven wrong, I think, when the Habs made it to the Cup final 2 seasons ago. So who knows? Maybe they'll prove us wrong again and make a playoff run. Um, Nashville had a pretty quiet offseason, relatively the same roster that we saw this past year. Two ads for them that are important are Brian McDonough and Kevin Lankinen. McDonough, I don't think is going to add too much. I mean, they've always, it seems like, have had a solid group of defensemen forever now. And I think adding McDonough just continues that. Obviously, some good veteran leadership. One of those guys that's not afraid to put his body on the line, whether it be blocking shots or laying hits. And then Kevin Lankinen just adds some support for UC Saros, which I think is going to be huge. I don't think they had the confidence last year in Riddick for him to play a ton of games, and it kind of showed. And then, of course, when they needed Saros the most was when he went down. So having a solid backup that played pretty well on a Chicago team that we know is just not good is going to be big for them. I think they probably make it back to the playoffs, but again, kind of like Dallas, I think they have a lot of reliance on one or two players playing very strong. And again, it's their goalie. If Saros has an off year at all, I don't think Nashville is a playoff team. And if he plays well, I think they probably are. Um, so I think I'll keep them in the bubble tier for now. Um, Another thing I'll be curious to see is just the likes of Johansson and Duchesne. Can they replicate the seasons they had last year, or do they see a bit of a drop off? So Nashville will be they'll be a solid team. I don't know that I'll be tuning into too many of their games, but I think they'll have a shot for sure. New Jersey, I think, is going to be another one of those teams that's just outside the bubble. I know a lot of Devils fans were pretty disappointed that they didn't get Johnny Gaudreau. Um, but adding Andre Palat, John Marino, Vitek Vanacek, Eric Holla, I mean, these are all guys that add some solid depth to their lineup. And I mean, they were just plagued by injuries the entire season last year. I think they have a pretty decent roster if they can maintain their health. Um, and if Blackwood can have a bounce back year, maybe they make a playoff push. I don't think that they're gonna be in the bubble. To be quite honest with you, I think the Metro is just a bit too strong right now. Um, but they should be a solid team. They might be that last team out um, in the Metro, so they're probably the top team in this outside the bubble division or tier. But we'll see what they can do. It'll be a fun season to watch New Jersey. Um, Fan base that's probably not very excited about watching their team this year is the Islanders. I don't think they're quite at the point where they're bad, but they had probably the most disappointing offseason of any team, right? I mean, they had Alex Romanov, solid young defenseman. I think he'll be a solid player for them, but I mean, they lose Barry Trotz. They don't really add any scoring depth. And for a team that struggled so much to put the puck in the net last year, you would have thought they would have been like desperately hungry to add something, someone that can put the puck in the net for them, and they don't go out and do it, which was kind of baffling to me. So um, we'll see. I mean, they have one of the better goaltending tandems in the league with Sorokin and Varlamov. Um, and I think the two of them alone can probably carry them pretty far. I don't think they make the playoffs. I don't think they're bottom of the conference, but I don't really think they make too much of a tough path for the other teams to get in. I think they're out by probably 10, 15 points when it comes to it. The New York Rangers, probably still a cup contender. They lose Andrew Kopp and, of course, Alex Georgiev to the Avs, but basically replace each of them one for one with Vinny Trocheck and Yaro Halak. Halak for Georgiev, I mean, Shesterkin's their guy. Like the team plays as Shesterkin plays. So if he has another solid season, they're a playoff team again. Maybe the top team in the Metro again. I mean, there were instances last year where they really struggled to put the puck in the net, and I think they have the talent to do more of that. And adding Trocheck, I think, probably helps. So I think they might be a better team than they were heading into last season. And again, as I mentioned earlier, they're one of those teams that a lot of people thought kind of accelerated quicker than they were expected to. Um, so maybe they make an even further push in the playoffs this year, which maybe it's cup final. We'll see. But Rangers should be pretty fun to watch. Another team that should be really interesting to watch is Ottawa. Obviously, adding DeBrinket and Giroux, excuse me, and then getting a bona fide starting goalie in Cam Talbot. They're going to be really, really interesting to watch this season. A ton of young talent, a fast team. I th- it's so tough. I mean, I think it's between Boston and Ottawa that probably get the last playoff spot in the East. Um, so I think for that reason, I'm going to keep them in the bubble as well. Um, but I mean, I think it's really going to be a race at the beginning of the season. How hot of a start can Ottawa jump out to, and how much can Boston hang on with their injuries, right? Um, the biggest question mark for me, kind of like a lot of these teams in the bubble, is their goaltending. Can Cam Talbot be consistent, stay healthy over the course of an 82 game season when he's the guy? Um, we'll see. I mean, they have a solid backup still, so I'm not too concerned about it. If he goes down, um, they're not gonna crumble by any means, but it'll be interesting. And then of course Drew is older, so how much does he really bring to that team? I think it's probably more of a facilitator role for him, regardless of who he plays with. But again, the young talent there is good enough that he can kind of play with whoever he wants, and it's going to be pretty solid for them. And then to Brinkett, I mean, if he can bring even a 35 goal pace to that team, I think they should be pretty good. It'll be interesting to watch that Atlantic Division for the first time um, in kind of a while, because it's for the longest time been a 3 or 4 horse race with Toronto, Tampa, Boston, and now Florida. Um, so seeing Detroit and Ottawa up there is it's fun again. I excited to watch the Atlantic this year for the first time in a long time. Philly. I think they're probably still in this Bedard watch tier, man. Um, just so much uh, tough stuff going on in this organization, right? I live in New Jersey, so this is the organization that I am the closest to geographically. Um, don't hate them, don't love them, but I definitely get more than an earful about the Flyers on a daily basis. Um, I just I don't know. I think their roster alone, they probably deserve to be here. Um, but it just seems like the team can't get a win. Like in the whole Gaudreau free agency situation, it was pretty well known that Gaudreau wanted to go back to Philly, and their GM Chuck Fletcher just seemingly opted not to make it happen, right? Um, and I feel like when you're a player watching your GM seemingly not make an effort for the biggest free agent, when you know he wants to go to your team, that has to be hard to watch. Um, so I don't know. I mean, they still have a half decent roster. I mean, they're not a playoff team. Their defense has way too many question marks. Carter Hart's had 2 kind of rough seasons in a row. Um, if he can bounce back, maybe they're a competitive team. But if he isn't um, kind of back to form, they're gonna have a pretty rough year, and I think they're probably in that battle for Bedard at the end of it. The Penguins, I think they're probably just in this playoff tier again. They, regardless of what Father Time does, will not go away. Um, Resign Malkin, resign Latang, resign Rickard Raquel, resign Brian Rust. Jason Zucker, I think, should be back if I remember correctly. So they're an aging team, but they're still going to be there. I don't think they're going anywhere. I think as long as Sidney Crosby can tie his skates and wants to play in the NHL, the Penguins are probably going to be a competitive team. So I think they probably slide into that third spot in the Metro. Maybe they make a wild card. Um, but I don't think they're going anywhere this year. I think that roster, as long as those pieces stay intact, it's going to remain strong enough to at least make the playoffs. And from there, I mean, yeah, Sidney Crosby and Evgeny Malkin, and anything can happen when those guys are on your team. The Sharks, probably in this rebuilding bad tier. Um, they just don't really have a lot of anything. I mean, Tomas Hertl, Logan Couture, um, it's pretty tough from there. They actually, I think this morning traded Aiden Hill to Vegas, um, given that Vegas now doesn't have a starting goalie with Leonard being out for the season. So I guess James Reimer is their guy. Um, we'll see. I don't really expect a lot out of San Jose. I kind of feel for those fans because they've been so good for so long, and it seems like they kind of just fell off a cliff pretty quickly and did not land softly. Um, we'll see. I mean, the one blessing for them is that the Pacific isn't a super stacked division, so they have some games against teams that are definitely going to be winnable. Um, but I'm not expecting too much from San Jose this season. Another team I'm not expecting too much from, Seattle. They did make some good offseason ads. Burakovsky, McCann, Bjorkstrand, um, all good depth pieces for them. I think Burakovsky might actually slot into their first line. Bjorkstrand could as well, honestly. Um, and then the two young centers, right? Matty Beniers and Shane Wright. Do those two guys? I mean, I would assume Matt Beniers makes the roster. Does Shane Wright make the roster? Do they both play a full season? And if that's the case, what do they bring to the team? I mean, it's definitely going to bring some energy, some hype around the organization. It was kind of odd going from Vegas as the expansion team to Seattle. Vegas, just because of how good they were, there was so much hype around that team in Seattle. I mean, shoot, there were times last year I almost forgot they were in the league. Um, so it'll be interesting to watch them this year. I think just having picked up Shane Wright in the draft is so huge for them. I think that alone brings a bunch of hype to that team. And they'll be interesting to watch. I think another thing too is with some of those additions in depth pieces, can Grubauer kind of get some weight taken off his shoulders? I mean, he played very well in that season in Colorado before he left that team, and then his numbers this year were just pretty rough. But again, kind of that same deal with like Alex Nedeljkovic, right? I mean, you're going from one very solid team to a team that just is not the same level of a roster. So I do think they're probably in this rebuilding tier two. Um, but I think they'll be an interesting team to watch. I mean, a lot of young players, should be a decently fast team. Um, it'll be interesting. I don't know where they'll slot in the Pacific with these three, but should be fun to watch this year. St. Louis, kind of similar um, to Pittsburgh here. I mean, I don't know if they're really on the same echelon. Obviously, Crosby has the cups and whatnot. Obviously, the Blues now have one of their own. Excuse me, but um, another team where it kind of comes down to goaltending. I'm a little bit more confident in the Blues than I am in a team like the Stars or the Predators. I think they have a little more offensive and defensive depth to make things happen if they have the off night in net. Um, but we'll see with them. I mean, Kyrou, if he has another season like the one he did this past year, same thing with Robert Thomas, they're going to be a very good team. And again, I'm pretty comfortable saying that they'll be a playoff team. Tampa Bay is going to be my other cup favorite. Another team that just will not go away. Losing Palat hurts, but you re-sign three of your big pieces, right? Um, and you still have the best goalie in the world on your team. And at the end of the day, goaltending finds a way to win playoff series. Um, Maybe not necessarily always winning you a cup. I think again, Colorado. I hate knocking Darcy Kemper because I've enjoyed watching him since he was on Minnesota. But he was good, but not great in the playoffs. But we've seen what Vasi can do in the playoffs. We've seen how much of a monster he can be. I think as long as he's there and as long as Tampa can like kind of score goals, they're going to be a playoff team, and they're more than capable of putting a couple pucks in the net per game right now. So I think they're going to be just fine this year. I think they should be at least into the third round. I think anything less than that would be kind of surprising. Maybe not disappointing for them, but surprising. Toronto. A pretty similar roster to last year. Obviously, the biggest change for them is in net, um, replacing Jack Campbell and Peter Mrazek with Matt Murray and Ilya Samsonov. Um, I still don't really know how to feel about the Matt Murray move. I mean, he was such a thorn in Pittsburgh and was so good, and then in Ottawa was also relatively good, but his health is just, if I was a Toronto fan, I would be horrified of having this guy as my starting goalie. Just because Samsonov, I mean, Samsonov will be interesting because he kind of rounded out at the end of the playoffs, right? He had a couple solid games for the Capitals. But he didn't show it throughout the season, and he was kind of on that same echelon as Shesterkin and Sorokin when they were all younger. And obviously, those two have propelled themselves to a league of their own. And Samsonov hasn't seen that growth. So maybe being on a new team helps that. Maybe Matt Murray stays healthy and proves a lot of people wrong and goes back to being a cup winning goaltender. Who knows? Some other ads for Toronto: Cal Yarncrook, Adam Gaudette, Nico Kubel. Just a lot of depth pieces that I think help them. Just because of their cap situation, they're going to constantly, kind of similar to Tampa, be juggling pieces in and out at the bottom end of their lineup. I kind of like all three of these ads, to be honest. They do lose a bit of that grit, that sandpaper in their lineup by adding them. None of these guys are super. I mean, it's not a knock on any of them, but none of them are like big scary dudes. But they're all solid hockey players. And then obviously re-signing Mark Giordano to a very team-friendly deal. Regardless of what he brings on the ice, his veteran leadership, his presence in the room is going to be big for them, just because they're still a relatively young team. So they're still a cup contender for me. I did debate throwing them in this playoff team tier, just because I'm that uncomfortable with their goaltending situation, but we'll see what happens. I think between the two of them, one will at least kind of grab the starting role. The question for me is just, what do those numbers look like? Is it a 920, a 925 starting goalie, and that's obviously expecting a lot, or is it more of that 905 to 912, not great but not bad? I kind of think it's going to be more in that grade, but we'll see what happens. It'll be an interesting year for the Leafs. Vancouver. I think Vancouver's tough. I think they're probably a bubble team. They didn't make a ton of offseason changes. They do add Ilya Mikheyev. Spencer Martin's probably going to be their backup goalie this year, and I mean Thatcher Demko has been fantastic for them this past season. So I don't anticipate Spencer Martin having to worry about playing too many hockey games this year. But it'll be interesting to watch. How many games can he slot into? Can he pick up a handful of wins for them in back-to-backs in situations where Demko needs the rest if they're going to try to make a playoff push? And yeah, I mean, hopefully a full season of a healthy Brock Besser. Maybe a little bit more from the likes of Connor Garland, Vasily Podkolzin, Elias Pettersson at a full season of what we know he's capable of. I think they're probably closer to the playoffs than they are being out of it. But I think there's still enough question marks there that they're going to be in this bubble tier for the time being. Vegas, super interesting. Was kind of mystified on where to put them, to be honest, and still am. I think they have some of the talent up front to be a playoff team, but then it seems the further down the lineup you go, the more they seem to drop somewhere in here. Goaltending, again, is a huge piece of success for any NHL team. And going into the season with, I guess, a starting tandem of Aiden Hill and Logan Thompson, not super promising. I think they have to go in this bubble team tier, just because they do still have so many strong pieces at the top of their lineup. I mean, they still have Alex Pietrangelo, Jack Eichel, Mark Stone. I don't think they're going to go quietly if they don't make the playoffs, but it'll be really, really interesting to watch Vegas this year and see what they're capable of doing. I would love to see at least a series of playoff Jack Eichel and see what he's capable of, but we'll have to see whether or not this roster is capable of doing it, because I'm not convinced yet personally, but yeah, it'll be an interesting season for Vegas for sure. The Capitals, I think they're probably still a playoff team. How many Metro teams do you have here? 1, 2, 3. So he'd be fighting Pittsburgh for the third seed, maybe looking at a wild card slot, but they're the only other Metro team in this section. So, Maybe I put them in bubble, actually. Caps are tough. Caps are tough. I think I put them in the bubble. No, they're a playoff team. Um, they can make the playoffs without a consistent performance from either of their two goalies. I think Kemper brings enough to them that they probably make the playoffs. Obviously, another team that's aging. The roster is sort of unchanged. I mean, they add Dylan Strome in the absence of Nick Backstrom, which is not an upgrade by any means. Um, but I think they're still going to be okay. I mean, I think Ovechkin's still going to pop probably 40 goals at least. Um, I think they still just maintain enough of their pieces that they're gonna get there. I don't think they really get far once they're there, but I think they probably have a similar season to this one with maybe a bit more confidence in their net minding. And who knows? I mean, there's always that argument to be made that when your goaltenders are playing well, that you can play a little bit more confidently in front of them. Maybe that was one of their woes this season, and they can open up their offense a bit more. Who knows? Another thing to note was that their power play for the first time, and it seems like forever, was not that good this year. If they can kind of revitalize that power play, um, maybe that pushes them past Pittsburgh. Maybe they can maintain that third seed. I don't see them finishing above Carolina or New York, but yeah, I mean, Caps are just another team that they don't seem to be going anywhere as long as, much like Crosby, if Ovi's tying his skates, I think it's going to be tough to get that team out of the playoffs. And to wrap things up, Winnipeg, they're a tough team, man. They didn't really lose a ton, right? They lose Paul Stastny. There's obviously a lot of drama with Pierre-Luc Dubois this offseason, which is, I don't know, to me kind of funny. Um, just the like ping pong of their young quote unquote superstar, or one supposed to be superstars. Um, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be shocked if Winnipeg ended up making it, but I will guiltily admit that going into last season, I make a playoff prediction bracket going into every season, and I'll post that on the channel this year. I actually had Winnipeg in my Stanley Cup final going into last season, which thankfully I can kind of look back on now and laugh. But yeah, as their season went along last year, I was hurting watching them slide down the standings. To be totally honest, um, I do think they're probably outside the bubble. I mean, I'm confident in Colorado, um, confident in Minnesota, confident in St. Louis, and I don't know that I see them finishing above Dallas or Nashville. Now, again, I probably have more confidence in Hellebuck having a consistent season more than I do Ottinger or Saros. Um, but I think the rest of the team for those three lineups in particular, the three central teams that are kind of like capable of making the playoffs, in my opinion. Um, I just don't know that the roster still has what it takes. I mean, Blake Wheeler and Mark Scheifele are not getting any younger. Um, that decor has its moments where it shines and it can be all right, but a lot of times it just seems like they struggle quite a bit. So we'll see. Winnipeg's one of those teams where I wouldn't be surprised if they just make me look like a clown and they finish, who knows, maybe second or third in the division. I mean, again, Connor Hellebuck's a fantastic goalie when he's playing at the top of his game, so anything could happen there. But yeah, I think for now that's probably it. Um, Let me know your thoughts on this in the comments below. Be interested to see what everyone thinks. Again, these are just my opinions. I'm sure there's some subconscious bias that's sneaking in here. Um, but at the end of the day, I'm a hockey fan, so I guess that's kind of to be expected. So thanks for tuning in, guys. I'll have some more uploads coming very soon. This has been Hockey Time. I'll catch you guys later. See ya.